Ludis sits wearily on the throne, reflecting that his 3-year reign as the 66th emperor was never his intention and he is ready to end it all. He recalls the 15 agonizing years under his father and brother, whose disastrous rule brought the empire to absolute ruin. While corruption festered and monster invasions ravaged the land, the foolish rulers continued to dispatch their troops overseas. Their negligence eventually cost them their lives, as both his father and brother perished on the battlefield. Consequently, the burden of the crown fell to Ludis, leaving him as the sole heir to the crumbling throne. Refusing to be a mere figurehead, he rejected the palace's attempt to use his youth and inexperience to make him a puppet. Utilizing his magic and servants, he secured victories, increased the budget for citizens, and granted them political participation. However, the current reality stands in stark contrast to his benevolent efforts. A furious mob gathers outside, screaming for the death of the man they disparagingly call a demon-born bastard. They denounce his rule, claiming he lives in luxury on their taxes while they suffer in poverty, oblivious to the truth. Ludis realizes the people are unstoppable now, likely incited by jealous princes who spread malicious rumors to undermine him. Even as danger closes in, he accepts his title's loss of power, content that the citizens can now participate in politics. His monstrous servants prepare for battle, declaring their readiness to fight for their master. Enraged by the humans' audacity to threaten Ludis, the creatures beg for the order to turn the inferior mob into charcoal. Ludis acknowledges the slur, demon-born bastard, admitting there is a valid reason behind the hateful name. The imperial family possesses the Emperor's Mark, a divine power that typically grants dominion over humans and sacred beasts. However, Ludis' specific mark grants him the unique and feared ability to control monsters instead of traditional subjects. Terrified by this dark power, the palace had previously confined him within the Academy of Magic to keep him isolated. Yet his power only grew alongside his army of servants, eventually making even high-level magic effortless for him during his academy days. Despite his rise to emperor, the stigma of his power remains, casting a shadow over his reign. Commanding authority, Ludis silences his agitated servants with a sharp shout. He reveals that he summoned them not to fight, but to reprimand them for daring to disobey his previous orders. His loyal subjects look on in shock, caught off guard by their master's stern rebuke. They plead their case, insisting that their only desire is to fight for his majesty. Unmoved, Ludis orders them to stand down and retreat to the west of the mountains, but they stubbornly refuse. Desperate to defend him, the monsters shout back that they cannot leave and vow to fight back against the humans. Ludis warns that slaughtering the citizens would negate all his hard work and ignite a new war between humans and monsters. The servants freeze in realization, the gravity of his words sinking in as they comprehend the futility of violence. Seeing no other option to prevent a massacre, Ludis resolves to force their compliance using the absolute obedience of the Emperor's Mark. He activates his power, declaring his full name, Ludis Vin Arcus Totpak, to bind them to his will. One servant stares in confusion while another panics, sensing that their master has faltered in the middle of his grand declaration. Ludis freezes in place, a look of realization washing over him as he mutters a quiet, "Oh no," at his mistake. His servants call out to him in concern, but he ignores them, internally sighing that he has forgotten his own ridiculously long name again. A cheerful slime named Rune beams and helpfully shouts the missing sequence, yelling that it is Fanny Satchel Clutch. The other servants shriek in terror and call Rune stupid, knowing that completing the name will activate the Emperor's Mark and enslave them to the command. Ludis looks down at his chaotic, loving family with a bittersweet smile, affectionately calling them his foolish servants. Resolute, he finishes the incantation, declaring his full name as Ludis Vin Arcus Tot Pacus Fanny Satchel Clutch, to bind them to his will. The spell takes hold immediately, and the servants weep, begging to serve him until the end of the world rather than be sent away. Ludis hardens his heart, declaring their bonds severed and ordering them to retreat across the central mountain range to save them. Silence reclaims the palace as the leaves drift through the empty halls, marking the final departure of his friends. Alone on the throne, Ludis finally lets his tears fall, whispering a quiet apology to the empty air. He composes himself, believing he has done all he was meant to do and that his own fate no longer matters. A rough hand suddenly grabs him by the collar, dragging him back to the violent reality of the insurrection. The attacker screams in his face, spitting hatred and cursing him as a damned demon-born bastard. Ludis tries to reason that the harvest will solve the famine, but the man accuses him of filling his pockets with taxes while they starve. Desperate to prove his innocence, Ludis tells them to cut him open to find no treasures, but the man demands the wealth he believes is hidden. The assailant tightens his grip, ignoring the logic and demanding that Ludis give her back, with burning fury. Confused by the personal nature of the demand, Ludis asks who exactly the man is referring to. The man reveals his lover died 8 years ago in the war caused by the emperors, killed by monsters because of their failure. Ludis realizes the tragedy dates back to his brother's reign, a legacy of failure that he has inherited. Accepting the collective guilt of the imperial line, Ludis solemnly agrees that they failed to protect her. The man screams through his tears, insisting that if not for the emperors, she and he would still have a future together. Ludis looks at him with tired eyes and offers his life, telling the man to go ahead if it will bring him any peace. He closes his eyes, fully accepting the gravity of the sins committed by his family and his own perceived failures. The man trembles with grief and rage, cursing aloud as he steels himself to take the emperor's life. With a sickening squelch, the blade drives home, and the man screams a final curse at the dying ruler. As the sword pierces him, Ludis thinks back on his existence, concluding that his life was actually quite boring. He reflects that he spent his youth locked in an academy like a caged bird and his reign consumed by war and heavy obligations. His memories drift to the only bright spots, which were learning magic and the time spent with his loyal servants. As darkness takes him, he hopes that if a next life awaits, he will be able to live much more freely than he did in this one. The scene shifts to a tranquil house by the water, a stark contrast to the bloody throne room he just left. Ludis's consciousness stirs, but he is confused by a strange language he has never heard before. A loving couple gazes down affectionately, their faces filling his vision as he looks up from a crib. He stares at his own tiny hands, realizing with a jolt that he is seeing the world through the eyes of an infant. Shocked, he questions his reality, realizing he has been reborn immediately after his death. The rhythmic sounds of manual labor echo through the quiet air of a peaceful village home. Swings a hoe with precision, Ludis reflects on the priest's words about reincarnation which he never believed until his current circumstances. He finds himself born into a simple peasant family, surprisingly retaining the name Ludis from his previous royal life. While his parents consider his name a common choice in the village, Ludis knows it is far more than a mere coincidence. Beyond his basic identity, the details of this new world remain an absolute mystery for him to unravel. He has managed to learn the local language, though he notes it bears no resemblance to any tongue he knew before. Isolated among mountains and fields, the village offers no books to the illiterate populace who only interact with wandering traders. As a stomping sound draws closer, Ludis is struck by a persistent feeling that something is fundamentally wrong with his surroundings. Panic erupts through the town as a man rushes in, screaming the dire news that the village chief has suddenly collapsed. The elderly chief lies bedridden and distressed in a small room, surrounded by his worried family members. Curiosity piqued, Ludis peeks into the room to assess the situation and see what is going on for himself. He activates a condition analysis spell, his eye glowing as he magically diagnoses the old man's ailment. He focuses his power on the chief's weakened body to pinpoint the exact cause of the medical emergency. To his utter disbelief, Ludis realizes the life-threatening emergency is actually nothing more than a basic cold. He asks to see the patient, genuinely bewildered that no one has simply used a basic healing spell to fix the problem. Placing a hand on the chief's chest, Ludis channels a gentle light to treat the minor illness. The magic takes effect immediately, bringing color back to the old man's face as the witnesses gasp in surprise. Confidently, he announces that the fever has been taken care of, treating the miracle as a mundane task. The room explodes with excitement as the villagers shout in awe, demanding to know how he performed such cool magic. Ludis stares back in confusion, caught off guard by their extreme reaction to a simple healing spell. A sudden epiphany strikes him, and he finally understands the source of his nagging unease in this world. Everything clicks into place as he realizes the fundamental truth about the people surrounding him. He discovers that absolutely no one in this village possesses even the slightest knowledge of how to use magic. Looking back at their daily chores, he realizes he has never seen them use magic for even the simplest of tasks. He wonders if their widespread illiteracy is the barrier preventing them from learning the arcane arts. The village children watch him with starry-eyed wonder, clearly seeing his magical talent as something extraordinary. Gradually regaining his magical senses, Ludis begins healing the sick and teaching basic spells to the other kids. Testing his combat prowess under the night sky, he thrusts his hand forward to summon his old power. A burst of flame confirms that he still possesses the knowledge to use pretty much everything he learned in his past life. However, he acknowledges that his current body only possesses an average amount of mana, requiring careful management. He reflects that mana was never an issue when his servants were by his side to empower him. A pensive silence follows as he considers the loss of his former allies and the distance of his old life. Crushing a piece of wood, he resolves not to worry, knowing he can always train to increase his mana reserves. He gazes out at the quiet village, still haunted by the question of why magic has vanished from the people here. Staring into the campfire, he wonders how long it has been since his death and where he truly is in this new world. The chief thanks him warmly, grateful for his consistent help and miraculous healing abilities. Ludis approaches the old man with a serious expression, ready to discuss a major turning point. He firmly states his intention to leave the village, realizing his journey for answers lies beyond its borders. The chief reacts with a look of quiet realization, perhaps sensing that the talented boy was always meant for greater things. Although he values the peace he has found here, Ludis knows he cannot stay hidden in the village forever. Driven by a newfound curiosity, Ludis yearns to travel across the vast corners of this world to uncover its deepest mysteries. He reflects on his previous life of confinement as an emperor and student, relishing his current freedom from those restrictive shackles. After listening to the request, the village chief acknowledges the boy's ambition but warns that leaving the village is no simple task. To guide the young man, the chief reveals there are exactly two viable paths that would allow him to venture into the world. The first option entails becoming a soldier for a feudal lord, a role that would send him to various castles and distant cities. Alternatively, the chief suggests the path of an adventurer as a second way to secure his departure from the quiet village. Intrigued by the unfamiliar term, Ludis questions the chief about what exactly it means to live as an adventurer. The chief explains that adventurers act as mercenaries for lords, taking on dangerous commissions to slay monsters for coin. Unlike static soldiers, these wanderers travel the entire world to exterminate threats, earning their name through constant exploration. Despite the inherent dangers in both professions, the chief remains open to the idea if Ludis possesses the necessary resolve. With his eyes sparkling with excitement, Ludis declares his enthusiastic desire to embark on the path of an adventurer. Accepting the boy's choice, the chief offers his support and promises to write a formal recommendation letter for him. As the next day dawns, the weight of the future settles over the village during this brief transition in time. Ludis delivers the shocking news to his parents, formally announcing his decision to seek a life of high-risk adventure. Terrified by the extreme dangers of the profession, his parents immediately voice their stern opposition to his reckless plan. After he begs them relentlessly for a chance, they finally crack and grant their reluctant permission for him to follow his dream. Years pass in a blur until the day Ludis finally reaches adulthood, ready to step into his destiny as a free man. The villagers gather in a bustling crowd to see him off, their voices filling the air with chatter and well wishes. Touched by their kindness, he listens as they urge him to take care and remind him he is always welcome to return. While patting a young boy's head, Ludis promises to earn a fortune so they can all enjoy the finest food imaginable. With a final wave, he announces his departure and turns his back on the only home he has known in this life. The sound of his steady footsteps marks the beginning of a long journey as he trots away from the peaceful village. Surveying the breathtaking landscape ahead, Ludis smiles broadly and celebrates the fact that he is finally free. Deep within the shadows of a nearby rocky outcrop, something hidden begins to stir as the young man passes by. A mysterious presence squirms in the darkness, sensing a familiar aura that hasn't been felt in a very long time. Emerging from the gloom, a loyal servant recognizes the energy and whispers a trembling, hopeful greeting to his master. Ludis arrives in the bustling city of Elpin, stepping into the streets with the singular goal of becoming an adventurer. He notes that simply declaring his intent isn't enough, as he must first gain official approval to join the ranks. Standing before the imposing adventurer guild, he realizes he must pass an examination to prove his worth. He pushes open the doors and enters the guild hall, taking in the sights of the busy interior for the first time. Observing the crowd, he notices familiar weapons and magic users, relieved that the technology mirrors what he knew in the Empire. He approaches a notice board but freezes, realizing that while he can speak the language, the written script is completely indecipherable to him. A receptionist snaps him out of his daze, and he awkwardly registers as a commoner from Elk Village after stumbling over his introduction. She pulls out a document to explain the exam, unaware that the young man in front of her cannot read a single word of it. The test is simple but dangerous, requiring him to prove his combat capabilities by defeating a monster in the wild. To pass, he must return with a body part or accessory from the creature as irrefutable proof of his victory. Ludys accepts the conditions with a smile, asking if there are any other requirements before he sets off. Walking away, he silently scoffs at the lax standards, wondering if he could just buy a monster part from the market to skip the fight. Reality checks his laziness immediately as he opens his purse and discovers he is completely broke. With no money to cheat the system, he resigns himself to the task and ventures into the forest near Elpin to hunt. Walking through the trees, he somberly notes that the hostile dynamic between humans and monsters remains unchanged in this era. He reflects on the cycle of hatred where monsters slaughter humans without mercy and humans retaliate with equal disdain. Memories of his past life surface, reminding him that while he killed monsters out of necessity, many others served him loyally. He laments his limited magical range, wishing his servants were there to cast Detect and scan the entire forest instantly. A sudden presence triggers his senses, causing him to snap his head toward a disturbance in the brush. Focusing his detection magic, he identifies several small clumps of mana huddled together, likely belonging to weak monsters. Following the energy signatures, he discovers a small, dark cave hidden amongst the roots and rocks. He steps into the darkness and casts Illuminate, flooding the gloomy tunnel with bright magical light. The sudden flash startles the inhabitants, causing a small figure near the ground to flinch away from the beam. A trembling voice calls out in fear, asking what a human is doing in their lair. Ludys identifies the creatures as blue slimes and casually explains that he bypassed their barrier using his detection magic. Realizing they are intelligent, he holsters his aggression and offers to negotiate a trade for a short sword instead of fighting. The slime freezes in sheer confusion, unable to process the human's bizarre request to barter. Ludys ignores the creature's bewilderment and addresses it directly to press for an answer. He drops the pleasantries and demands to know why a random slime in a forest speaks the specific language of the Empire. The slime explodes in defensive anger, shouting that he is a proud servant of the great Emperor Ludys Vin Arcus Tote Pacus Fanny Satchel Clutch. Ludys recoils in genuine shock, his eyes widening as he hears his own ridiculously long name shouted back at him. He stares at the creature in disbelief, demanding to know how a slime could possibly know that specific title. Desperate to make the connection, Ludys points at himself and screams that he is the very emperor the slime is serving. The slime looks at him with utter skepticism, muttering that the name he just said belongs to his master, not this human boy. He adds a specific detail about the emperor's habit of forgetting his own name, a trait that hits suspiciously close to home. Ludys tries to argue, but the slime refuses to believe him, insisting that his majesty died and cannot be alive. Realizing words are useless against such loyalty, Ludys admits he understands the doubt and prepares to offer proof. He activates a spell called Project, creating a glowing orb of light in his hand to display the truth. He explains that this magic allows him to stream his memories directly into the slime's mind to verify his identity. The slime stares mesmerized at the glowing orbs of memory, on the verge of witnessing the impossible return of his master. Rune dissolves into a puddle of tears, wailing his master's name with an outpouring of emotion that echoes through the cave. Ludys watches the display with a solemn expression, processing the weight of the reunion under the silent moon. Recovering his composure, Rune explains that over 1,000 years have passed since Ludys' death and they are now west of the Central Mountains. He recounts the chaotic aftermath of their retreat, describing how the leaderless servants held a futile meeting before eventually scattering to the winds. Choosing isolation, Rune settled in this hidden cave to avoid humans while slowly gathering new allies over the centuries. Ludys listens intently, realizing that Rune's survival is due to the biological immortality of slimes that protects them from aging. He processes the scale of Rune's efforts, noting that the little slime has managed to amass a force of over 1,000 followers. A shadow crosses Ludys' face as the guilt of his past decisions weighs heavily on his conscience. He looks down at his loyal friend and quietly admits that he must have made Rune's life incredibly difficult. Rune looks up with honest eyes, confirming that the last millennium was indeed a struggle without his master. Shaking off the gloom, The slime pivots to the immediate problem and asks if Ludys needs a monster part to pass his exam. Ludys prepares a healing spell as Rune cheerfully tears off a piece of his own body, insisting it will grow back quickly. A warm light engulfs the cave as Ludys casts Shine, instantly regenerating the damage to his servant. Rune basks in the familiar glow, overwhelmed by the nostalgic warmth of his master's recovery magic. Ludys secures the slime fragment in his pouch, satisfied that he now has the ticket to becoming an official adventurer. Behind him, Rune begins to tremble violently, his gelatinous body shaking with a desperate internal struggle. Unable to hold it back, the slime screams out for his master, his voice cracking with urgent need. Ludys pauses and turns halfway back, confused by the sudden outburst from his friend. Rune begs with his entire being, pleading to be reinstated as a servant just like in the old days. Ludys stares in stunned silence, admitting to himself that he never expected such undying loyalty after what he did. He tries to push Rune away for his own good, reminding the slime that he already discarded them once and has nothing left to offer. Rune vehemently rejects the narrative, screaming that they all knew he only sent them away to save their lives. The slime declares that the betrayal was an act of love, and now that they have met again, his only wish is to serve. Ludys hesitates, torn between his desire to stay with Rune and the reality of his humble new existence. He looks at his hands, assuming that his power is gone and that he is nothing more than a peasant without the Emperor's mark. A sudden pulse of energy shocks him, and he gasps as he feels the dormant power of the mark awaken within him. The realization hits him like a lightning bolt. He hasn't just retained his memories, but his divine authority as well. He clenches his fist, interpreting this miracle as a divine mandate to atone for his past sins by fixing the world. With his resolve hardened, he looks down at the eager slime and asks one final time if he is truly sure about this path. Rune bounces with ecstatic energy, shouting a resounding yes and begging for the chance to fight for him again. Ludys smiles gently and reaches out, placing a finger on the slime's head to seal the pact. Magic swirls around them as Ludys formally grants Rune the honor of servitude, accepting his oath of utmost loyalty. A genuine smile softens the Emperor's face, the burden of 1,000 years lightening in this moment of connection. The image overlaps with a memory of the past, as Ludys welcomes Rune back to his side with a heartfelt declaration of happiness. Ludys declares his intention to return to the guild, ready to leave the cave and resume his journey. Rune immediately pledges his devotion, insisting that he will follow his majesty wherever he goes. Ludys worries about bringing a monster into the city, but Rune dismisses the concern with confident reassurance. With a sudden puff of smoke, the slime triggers a transformation to hide his monstrous form. The smoke clears to reveal a stunning young woman, leaving Ludys completely stunned by the change. He stares in shock at the familiar face, his cheeks flushing as he processes the human disguise. Ludys notes that while slimes have unique disguise magic, it is usually imperfect and lasts only a short time. However, Rune reveals a flawless form, explaining that he was rigorously trained during his time as a servant. The disguise is indistinguishable from a real human, copying the original with absolute perfection. Rune boasts that he has replicated everything, from body composition down to the texture and softness of the skin. Ludys admits that disguising as a human is a smart move, but he points out a critical flaw in the plan. He turns to Rune and demands to know why, of all people, he chose to impersonate Cecile. Memories flood back as Ludys identifies the guise as Cecile, a prominent figure from his academy days. She was the Grand Duke's daughter and an elite mage, known for her beauty and high status. More personally, Ludys blushes as he recalls that she was also the classmate he secretly had a crush on. Panic sets in as he warns Rune that if the real Cecile sees them, they will be in serious trouble. Rune cheerfully dismisses the risk, revealing that impersonating her is safe because she is no longer alive. Ludys falls silent at the news, deciding not to ask why Rune chose the form of his deceased friend. Shifting the topic, Ludys orders Rune to drop the royal title and stop calling him Your Majesty. He explains that he is no longer an emperor, but simply an adventurer named Ludys. Rune enthusiastically accepts the new order, instantly correcting himself to call him Master Ludys. As they walk through the forest, Ludys explains that becoming an adventurer was the only way to fulfill his dream of travel. His expression darkens as he considers the deeper implications of roaming the world a millennium later. He realizes that in this era, there is a strong possibility he might encounter other demonic servants who survived. A heavy guilt weighs on him as he wonders if those abandoned allies will ever be able to forgive him. Rune explodes with anger, shouting that any servant who fails to understand Ludis's feelings is unworthy of the title. Ludis smiles gratefully at the slime's fierce loyalty, though he knows deep down that reconciliation won't be that simple. His thoughts are interrupted as he spots a disturbance further down the road. A carriage sits stranded ahead, its wheel broken and lying uselessly on the ground. Chaos erupts around the vehicle as a pack of goblins launches a violent ambush. Ludis quickly scans the battlefield, counting 10 monsters overwhelming the 3 desperate guards. Watching the defense crumble, he calculates that the guards will be wiped out if the situation continues. Rune senses the bloodlust and eagerly asks for permission to slaughter the attackers immediately. Ludis hesitates, wanting only to stop the fight, but realizes that lethal force is now unavoidable. He decides to intervene, ordering Rune to provide covert magical support so they don't draw too much attention. Analyzing the enemy formation, Ludis notes 8 spearmen and 2 archers, prioritizing the ranged threat. A guard screams in terror as a goblin spear plunges down for a killing blow. Ludis snaps his fingers, activating a defensive spell just milliseconds before the weapon strikes. A shimmering magic wall erupts between the monster and the guard, shattering the spear upon impact. With the immediate danger blocked, Ludis shifts his focus and prepares to target the goblins using bows. Ludis snaps his fingers, unleashing a crackling thunder whip that arcs through the air to strike the goblin archer. The remaining goblins freeze in terror, their morale shattering as they witness their comrades' instant defeat. A goblin brute attempts a sneak attack from behind, swinging a massive axe down toward Ludis's exposed neck. Ludis calmly sidesteps the blow and identifies the attacker as the leader of this miserable pack. Realizing these creatures won't surrender easily, he steels himself to exterminate the threat with lethal force. He warns the monster not to blame him for what comes next as he prepares a point-blank counterattack. A blazing fireball erupts from his hand, engulfing the goblin leader in a vortex of scorching flames. The remaining goblins scream in panic, their will to fight evaporating instantly as their leader burns. Terrified by the overwhelming magic, the survivors scramble over each other to retreat into the forest. Ludis watches them flee, stunned by the realization that even goblins in this era speak the Empire's language. He considers chasing them down to investigate further but stops when he hears a desperate cry from behind. The surviving guards shout for help, pleading with the powerful stranger to assist them immediately. Ludis feigns exhaustion and plays the role of a rookie adventurer to lower their suspicions about his immense power. He approaches the carriage and sees a noble girl slumped over, completely unconscious and pale. His eyes widen as he recognizes the severity of her condition, noting the unnatural pallor of her skin. The guards gather around her in a panic, crying out her title as Your Highness, while she remains unresponsive. Ludis examines her arm, spotting a small but ominous wound that confirms his suspicions of foul play. He pushes past the frantic guards, asking them to step aside so he can assess the situation properly. Activating his diagnostic magic, he scans her body to determine the exact nature of the affliction. The analysis confirms that the arrow was coated in a deadly toxin, poisoning her bloodstream instantly. Ludis grimaces as he identifies the specific malady as a poison curse, a magical ailment far worse than simple venom. The guard captain realizes the horror of the situation, shouting that the curse spreads rapidly and they are out of time. Ludis calculates the spread rate and realizes with dread that she has less than 5 minutes left to live. A cold sweat breaks out on his face as he acknowledges that the situation has spiraled into a worst-case scenario. He surveys the broken carriage and the missing horses, confirming there is absolutely no way to transport her. Even if they had horses, the journey to the nearest city would take far too long to save her life. The only option left is to use Purification, a high-tier spell that can neutralize the curse instantly. However, he hesitates, knowing that Purification is sage-class magic that no ordinary human in this era should possess. Ludis weighs the risk of exposing his identity against the girl's life, desperate to avoid drawing attention to himself. The guards look on in despair, helpless to stop the princess from slipping away right before their eyes. Unable to let her die, Ludis makes his choice and instructs the guards to stand back while he works. He signals Rune to supply him with mana covertly, ensuring he has enough power to cast the spell without fainting. Ludis places his hand over the girl's chest and chants, Purification, flooding her body with cleansing light. The girl gasps for air, her body arching slightly as the magic purges the curse from her system. Color returns to her cheeks and her eyes flutter open, eliciting a cheer of relief from the overjoyed guards. Ludis quickly steps back and lies, claiming this is just temporary first aid and urging them to see a doctor. He thinks to himself that she is actually fully cured, but maintaining the ruse is essential to keep his cover intact. Trying to make a quick exit, he turns to leave, but a guard frantically calls out for him to wait. Ludis waves them off with a nervous smile, insisting they don't need to thank him and begging them to just ignore him. He raises a hand in a casual farewell, desperate to escape before they start asking difficult questions. The guards ignore his modesty and rush to the princess, panic rising again as they fret over her condition. The captain barks orders to his men, commanding them to prepare for immediate transport back to the city. The princess breathes heavily, her mind still hazy but sharp enough to process what just happened to her. She stares at the retreating figure, realizing with shock that the boy just used the legendary spell, Purification. Ludis narrates that he escorted the group to the doctor after saving the princess, ensuring their safety before stealthily slipping away into the shadows. He overhears the reassuring news that the poison has been neutralized and the girl's wound is minor enough to heal without issue. Rune beams with excitement and calls out to her master, celebrating that they are finally free to head to the Adventurers Guild. A lovely young woman apologizes for the delay, though Ludis remains unfazed by the sudden appearance of his disguised servant. He explains to the audience that Rune has used her disguise skill to transform into a human girl to blend in with society. Rune stands ready in her new form, eagerly asking Master Ludis for his next command with unwavering loyalty. Ludis sighs and reprimands her, reminding her to drop the formal titles since he is living as a simple farmer now. He decides that since she has a convincing human form, she should register as an adventurer alongside him. A sudden realization strikes him mid-sentence, and he freezes as he remembers a crucial bureaucratic hurdle. He realizes they require an application form from the village chief, meaning they might have to trek all the way back home. Rune suddenly perks up with a bright idea, cheerfully suggesting that they simply create the necessary documents themselves. She looks at him with a mischievous, knowing smile, leaving Ludis momentarily confused by her confidence. Understanding dawns on him as he realizes she intends to use her unique abilities to forge the paperwork on the spot. Ludis agrees to the plan, reasoning that their harmless forgery won't inconvenience anyone or cause real trouble. They arrive at the guild reception, where Ludis requests to register both himself and Rune as new adventurers. He presents the forged application forms along with a monster part to serve as the required proof of their combat skills. The receptionist accepts the items and asks them to wait a moment while she processes the results of their application. Ludis reveals that he transmitted the memory of the genuine form to Rune, who then used her body to replicate it perfectly. He praises her flawless disguise capabilities, noting that he often used this same trick for schemes in his past life. The receptionist returns, and Ludis presents the slime jelly as their trophy, hoping it passes as a standard drop. She stares at the blue jelly with a look of utter bewilderment, seemingly confused by the item he has offered. Ludis quickly apologizes, explaining that slimes are the weakest monsters and this was all they could manage as rookies. To his horror, the receptionist reveals that blue slimes are actually incredibly rare monsters in this current era. Ludis panics internally, realizing his attempt to be low-key has backfired because he lacked common knowledge of the times. He sweats nervously and lies through his teeth, claiming he underwent great hardship and searched the deep forest to find it. The receptionist continues to stare blankly while Rune maintains an awkward, innocent smile to support the lie. Breaking into a bright smile, the receptionist praises them enthusiastically for their dedication and hard work in finding it. She hands over their official badges, and Ludis exhales in relief that his desperate fabrication was actually believed. The receptionist formally welcomes them, declaring that the two of them are now officially registered adventurers. Later that afternoon, they attend an orientation session to learn the specific details of their new career. Ludis learns that adventurers can cross national borders freely and use guilds across the continent, perfectly suiting his travel goals. The job involves various duties including monster extermination, but the requirements don't seem particularly difficult. He is informed that adventurers are categorized into specific classes based on their individual aptitudes. These titles include roles like warrior, hunter, and mage, which are assigned if the applicant meets the guild's criteria. The receptionist concludes by informing them that both he and Rune will undergo an aptitude test the following day. The scene shifts to their in room, where Ludis unbuckles his belt and prepares to rest after the long day. He collapses onto the bed, staring up at the ceiling as he finally lets his body relax. He admits that while the fight wasn't dangerous, he is exhausted because he hasn't engaged in combat for 15 years. Rune suddenly looms over him in her human form, gazing down at him with an intense, affectionate expression. She dives onto him for a hug, causing Ludis to panic and shout as he tries to handle her overwhelming enthusiasm. Ludis' heart races as Rune leans in close, catching him off guard with a sudden burst of affection. Clinging to him, the disguised servant offers to act as a living pillow or give him a massage until Ludis frantically demands he stop. The surrounding tenants scream for silence, furiously reminding the pair that the inn's paper-thin walls hide nothing. A sharp gasp escapes Ludis as he realizes the sheer volume of their chaotic reunion has disturbed the entire building. Terrified of his own impoliteness, Rune collapses into a literal puddle of slime while weeping that he has made the greatest mistake of his life. Ludis watches the melting monster with a pang of guilt, wondering if his stern rejection was far too harsh for the loyal servant. Staring at the floor, he suddenly recognizes the fundamental gap in their shared history and the weight of the years between them. He realizes that while only 10 years have passed for him since reincarnation, Rune has endured 1,000 years of lonely waiting. Softening his gaze, Ludis kneels beside the shivering slime to offer a moment of genuine comfort and reconciliation. He gently strokes the creature's back, confessing he always yearned for this reunion and is simply glad they are finally together again. The slime bubbles with pure, unadulterated joy, blushing as he basks in the long-awaited warmth of his master's hand. Shifting focus to their future, Ludis brings up the critical aptitude test scheduled at the guild for the following morning. He commands Rune to suppress his power and use only basic magic, finding it convenient that the servant's human disguise already dampens his mana. Ludis stares into the distance, realizing he must prioritize his own magical concealment above all else to maintain his cover. He reflects on the unexpected difficulty of fine-tuning his strength, finding that holding back is harder than letting loose. In his previous life of constant warfare, he simply devoted every drop of mana to high-level destruction without a second thought. If he chooses a magic class now, he must meticulously avoid any high-tier spells to ensure his true identity remains a secret. Turning to his friend, he asks Rune's preference for a class and learns the servant intends to become a warrior due to his limited magic. They discuss the necessity of earning gold as adventurers so they can eventually afford high-quality armor and weaponry. A small smile plays on Ludis' lips as he points out how incredibly happy Rune looks in this new life. The servant blushes and admits that the prospect of adventuring with his master fills him with a genuine sense of excitement. Ludis looks at his adventurer badges, reflecting on the newfound freedom to decide his own destiny that he never possessed as a caged emperor. Reaching out, he takes Rune's hand firmly and urges him to never hesitate in expressing his own desires and dreams. They swear a mutual oath to challenge this new world together and make a name for themselves as legendary adventurers. Rune shouts his agreement with absolute loyalty, ready to follow his master into whatever dangers the future may hold. Looking at the map, Ludis plans to earn money and establish a base of operations while expanding his search across the continent. His eyes sharpen with determination as he vows to eventually track down and reunite with all his missing servants. The sun rises on a new morning as the pair strides through the city streets toward the guild for their evaluation. A hooded figure suddenly intercepts them, verifying if they are indeed the newcomers named Ludis and Rune. The stranger introduces himself as Nor, the man officially assigned to conduct their upcoming adventurer aptitude test. Nor fixes them with a piercing gaze, revealing that he is a professional mage as he welcomes them to the examination.